Good evening, all postgraduate students and maybe some others joining us tonight for our session entitled Advanced Research Skills. I'm Professor Jeanette Maritz, and I will be facilitating the session this evening, as well as the second part on Thursday evening. So we will have two parts, and I will be facilitating both. So tonight and then Thursday evening as well. So from my side, welcome. Please be comfortable. We will be responding to questions and answers on the Q&A chat section of the Teams meeting. So please keep a pen and paper ready, or if you're ready, start with your answers, if you have questions, if you have any, from the start, so that when we are done with the presentation, we can start with the interactive discussion. So you can start already in the Q&A section if you have any questions as we carry on. So there will be a slide presentation first, and then I will stop sharing and we will go over to the question and answer session. So I'm for now just going to stop sharing my face. I will show it again a bit later on, but let's start with this evening. So having said we are looking at advanced research skills, I sometimes have a bit of a problem with the advanced skills, because what is advanced to one might not be advanced to another, and what might be simple to one might be advanced for another. So I will be starting with some basics. But I'm starting with basics in terms of a section that is often troublesome for students and researchers alike. And that is philosophical frameworks. So for some of you, you might know them and it's not advanced. For others, it might help clarify. And for others, it might just be a feedback and just maybe brushing up on the knowledge that you have. And then we'll go over to some different designs, and we will look at designs and how they can become more advanced, and how advanced they can be common. There's combinations maybe in data collection, data analysis, that can also contribute to a more advanced research design, for instance. We will probably leave it at that for tonight's session. So that will probably cover most of this evening. But let's start with the slides, and we will comment as we go. So the aim of tonight and Thursday's session is to open and broaden your methodological thinking, and that's the essence of the presentation. So I hope that by the end of this session you can carefully embrace and consider cutting-edge but widely different methods and techniques for tackling your research question or your research problem, and not only train you in writing a multi-method research proposal. As we present, you will see there's many others. There's mono methods, multi-method, and mixed methods, and we will talk to all of those. But in essence, I hope by the end of these two sessions that you would have broadened your methodological thinking and maybe just confirm what you already are doing, or that you might add to your considerations with a more thoughtful perspective. So I'd like to start with the research onion of Saunders. I don't know how many of you know about Saunders's research onion, but this is just a good graphic to really see what influences your choices of designs and methods and methodologies in your research. So on the outside, the first aspect that will influence our choice of designs and methods is your research philosophy. And that's why I'll be spending a bit more time on the philosophical aspects, what it means, and potentially how it can be applied and how it would influence your research choices. Then our research approaches, sometimes, depending on the author, they might say that there is a research design. For instance, qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods. Other people call it an approach, and other call it a strategy, which sometimes makes it very confusing. So I usually tell my students, follow one author and just make sure that you consistently use the words that you're referring to and not interchange. So if you start your study by saying that it's a qualitative design with a phenomenological approach, then please use those words in that order or in that description throughout your study. So it's not really important what you call, what you refer to it as long as you are consistent in your use. So for Saunders, your research approaches is either deductive or inductive, and we'll talk a bit about that as well. And then you would see that he calls research strategies the different types of designs that we get: quantitative, qualitative, mixed methods, different types of qualitative research or quantitative research styles. And then within those designs or strategies, we will have our methods and how we are going to collect data. Saunders then looks at different perspectives in terms of how we can build our strategies, and specifically referring to cross-sectional or longitudinal, but we will talk about that a bit further as we deal with the designs. And then coming to our choices regarding data collection and data analysis, and those are our techniques and procedures. So from this onion, you would see that the choices we make, usually we would say, oh, I want to do a survey, before we've even considered the designs or the philosophical perspectives of our choices. That's usually very clear cut for students right in the beginning. But as you can see, that's the very inside of this onion, and there's many considerations that we need to take, and that lies on the outside of those techniques and procedures that we might want to follow. And for that reason, it's we're also going to follow that order in terms of the research onion, and have a look at what informs our choices on the outer layers, and how do they then hold hands throughout our research project. So this concept of holding hands is a very important concept. It means that there is logic and coherence in terms of your research project and the decisions that you make in the design and in the methods, or the methodology as some call it. And so it's very, very important. I usually say that when we write our research, whether it's our proposal or our dissertation or thesis, it's often like taking the hand of a child and you're going to walk through a forest. So you don't want to give this child any scares. So before we start walking through the forest, you might tell the student, we're going to walk through this forest and you might see a path and we'll be following this path, and on the right you will be seeing trees and on the left you'll be seeing a river. And so you talk the child through the journey. Now, writing your proposal or your research is a similar process. So we want to tell the reader, which in your case, if it's a proposal, the reader will be the committees that okays your research proposal, and for the master and dissertation students, the first reader will be your examiner. So you don't want to give the examiner any frights, and therefore it's very important to, some call it, have a golden thread. Others call it logical coherence. But you want to show your reader that you have carefully considered each decision and that each decision forms a logical whole and is aligned to all aspects on the inner and outer layer of your onion. Having said that, let's then start with the outside layer, and those are this layer represents your research philosophies. Now, for some of you, when you hear the word philosophy, your eyes might already roll over. But I hope that after tonight, we can maybe demystify some of the concepts related to our philosophical choices and the assumptions. So there's four main aspects that influences our choices in our research designs and methods. The first is, like Saunders says, on the outer layer, our philosophical assumptions, so our philosophy under which we will be doing our research, our personal worldview or our personal paradigm, our theoretical framework or frameworks might influence our choices, and these then guide in main our choices of designs and methods throughout our study. So let's have a look at what do we mean by philosophical assumptions. So other than that, you need to make a decision of the philosophical paradigm that you will be using. You also need to be aware of the assumptions of that philosophy and how it will impact your research. Now, there are certain words in the rhetoric when we talk about philosophies. So these words are often the words that scare people the most. So there are 5 philosophical assumptions in any philosophical paradigm. And they refer to ontology, epistemology, axiological dimensions, rhetorical, and methodological dimensions. Now, these words are often scary and that they often make you run because they are difficult to understand. But I hope by the end of tonight, you will understand it a bit better and you'll be able to apply it to your research. So the first dimension is the ontological dimension, and that is what you believe about reality. So, for instance, what might say, I believe that reality is static. It's the same. Reality is the same every day for everyone. That's a specific ontological dimension and stance or assumption that you hold. The epistemology dimension is what you believe about the relationship of the researcher and that of that being researched, and also the knowledge claims that is, or how knowledge is developed, or the claims about what knowledge is and what knowledge is deemed valued. So, for instance, you might believe that when you are working in a quantitative paradigm or in a deductive paradigm, that you you believe that experiments are the best way. You can control an experiment, you can have a control group, and you prefer being at a distance from collecting the data. Someone else might believe that no, they want to be close to participants. They want to interview them and have a more inductive stance. And they believe that knowledge, for instance, is constructed between the researcher and the participant. So those are examples of an epistemological dimension. Then what we mean when we talk about an axiological dimension is what we believe is the role of values in the research. So research values might be that you believe in authenticity, for instance, in a qualitative study, or you believe that there is different value systems at play that influences the creation of knowledge. But that's usually if you are speaking about the values in research, you are often speaking then on the axiological dimension of the paradigm. So what you believe about the language in research, and that's the rhetorical dimension. That is the language we use in each of these paradigms and the language we will use in our chosen designs, and often also in our data collection and data analysis. So for example, in a phenomenological study, we would speak about the essence of the experience or the essence of a lived experience. Now, that is typically the rhetoric or the language of a phenomenological study, where a grounded theory study might have a different rhetoric and might have a different set of language and terminology that they use in that particular design. And we will also learn tonight, even in this discussion on philosophical assumptions, um, ontology, epistemology, axiology, and methodological dimensions is the rhetoric of the philosophical assumptions and the philosophical frameworks. So each of these frameworks or paradigms have their own language and their own rhetoric. And then the one that most of you are quite familiar with is your methodological dimension. What do you believe about the process of research? So that is usually with the epistemology and the methodology, those are often assumptions that you are quite acquainted with and that you know. So added to this is the ontology, meaning the belief about reality, axiology, the role of values in research, and then the language of research is the rhetorical dimension. So what I'd like to do is take you through different some of the main philosophical paradigms and just show you how they might apply when we want to work with our research designs. So please remember that the philosophical paradigms lie on a continuum. They are neither right nor wrong. They might be right and wrong for your research question, but they live on a continuum where usually positivism is on the one side of the spectrum, and there are quite evolving philosophical discourse going on in terms of the other side of the continent. So typically we might have on the far, if you want to, far left, or where research paradigms initially started in terms of positivism, and that was more the quantitative designs. And with anything in life, whatever is established, there will always be discourses around it and critique against it. And so these paradigms develop. So from positivism, there were many movements in between, but more or less in the middle of the continuum, you will find interpretivism or constructivism, which is more aligned to the qualitative designs. And then as the critique came against both quantitative and qualitative designs, mono designs, we found ourselves in the mixed method designs, which is more aligned to pragmatism. And as you can imagine, because these things live and change, there are now other philosophies and other paradigms, and we will speak about that later. So after the qualitative and mixed methods paradigm, there is now a shift in philosophical assumptions, and some call it, in terms of qualitative research, the post-qualitative wave. So we are moving beyond only qual or mixed methods. There's now also a post-qualitative wave that isn't so current. It's been going on since the 1980s. But we'll talk a bit about that as we carry on. So please just keep in mind that these paradigms on a continuum. So you might lean more to the one and lean less to the other. So you can find yourself somewhere on the continuum. So if we speak about positivism, usually our quantitative designs lies within the positivistic paradigm. Now, positivism, the assumption in terms of their ontological assumption is that they assume that the objective reality that exists independent of human perception. So they believe that there is an objective reality, and that you can measure it, and it can exist independent of the human perception. In their epistemology, the assumption is that knowledge is best gained through observation and empirical measurements. And their methodological assumption is around quantitative methods such as experiments and surveys, which are often used. So can you see how these words now, the rhetoric of the paradigms, are becoming applied, and they're not just weird words that we don't know what to do with it. Now, if we go a bit further on the continuum, we will find the interpretivism or constructivism paradigms. So in those paradigms, the ontological belief is that reality is socially constructive and subjective. Now you can see this is quite opposite of the positivistic paradigm, which believed that reality is objective and can be measured. Yeah, the ontology is subjective, or the belief about reality is a subjective belief. Their epistemology assumptions is that knowledge is going through understanding the meaning that individuals attach to their experiences. So now, just in the rhetoric, you can hear a shift in terms of some objective view versus a subjective view, and the researcher moving much closer to their data and their participants than what the positivists might do. And their methodology aligns more to the qualitative methods, such as interviews and observations, which is then often used under this paradigm. I'm going to go to critical theory. Some of you might be interested, or it can maybe you can maybe find that this is applicable to your study. Is critical theory, and the ontology there is that reality is shaped by social, political, cultural, and economic factors. So if you have a study that's maybe looking at social, political, cultural, or economic factors, then this theory or paradigmatic perspective might be suitable to your study. Their knowledge claims are that knowledge is gained by critiquing the power structures that influence human experience. And in this paradigm, both quantitative and qualitative methods may be used, often with the aim of social transformation. So if you are undertaking a study looking at social transformation or a phenomena that's aligned with social transformation, or the outcome of your study is towards social transformation, taking into account social, political, cultural, and economic factors, you might want to align your study with critical theory or the critical philosophical paradigm. Now, we've talked about a possible paradigm for quantitative studies, for qualitative studies, for studies that's looking at social transformation. And the next one is pragmatism. Now, this is a paradigm in which we find mixed methods research. So although in mixed methods, we'll talk about it just now, you'd have two designs, a qualitative and a quantitative designs. And your philosophical assumption is pragmatism. With the ontological belief that reality is constantly renegotiated, debated, and interpreted, and knowledge is both constructed and based on the reality of the world, it is practical. So this word, the rhetoric in pragmatism, is the word practical. It is pragmatic. So why do we choose mixed methods? Because it best answers our research question. We are looking at practical application and what makes practical sense to answer your research question. So in this paradigm, both qualitative and quantitative methods may be used depending on what is most practical in answering your research question. So this is very, very important to keep in mind. Pragmatism for mixed methods and their assumptions around pragmatism. Then you might also find postmodernism, who believe that reality is fragmented and decentered without a universal truth. And the epistemology assumptions is that knowledge is unstable and requires deconstruction. And then you would see how their methodology aligns, because they use various methods, but with the aim to deconstruct either text, discourses, or social practices. So if you believe in the concept of that we need to deconstruct either social practices or knowledge practices, and that is important for us to illuminate, for instance, new practices or new knowledge, postmodernism might suit you better. Decolonization is something, and the decolonizing paradigms and methodologies is something quite important to the UNISA students and the UNISA, what UNISA stands for. So there's a lot of talk around decolonizing methodologies, and we'll speak about that probably tomorrow. But the ontology and the assumptions here is that reality is multi-layered and influenced by historical, cultural context, often dominated by colonial power structures. The epistemology is that knowledge is gained through indigenous perspectives and frameworks, and then indigenous research methods and participation approaches are then often used. So if you have a study or topic that is influenced by historical or cultural context, and there is issues around specifically colonial power structures, then you might find yourself in a decolonizing paradigm. and you might then decide to use, for instance, indigenous research methods, for instance, storytelling, which is often used within these in the choice of these methods. And then lastly, I'm just teasing you with the last one. This is the post-qualitative turn, and it relates to critical post-humanism. In this paradigm, their ontological belief is reality is not solely human-centered. It includes non-human entities possessing agency. So their argument is that the human is usually in a hierarchy of importance, and the human is at the top of this hierarchy. And what they are arguing for is that we decenter the human, and that that all things that possess agency is on the same level. So it's deconstructing this hierarchical thing about the human being the top of everything. So their epistemology belief is that knowledge is co-constructed through the interactions between human and non-human agents. Now, a non-human agent might be, well, at the moment, something you can relate to is, for instance, technology. If you just look at ChatGPT, it has a lot of agency. So our interaction between ourselves and technology, for instance, is something that the post-humanism paradigm might look at. So usually the research methods may include quite a number of ways of collecting data, but the analysis of the data is often looked at differently, because we look at the difference in terms of agency. We also look at, for instance, a typical rhetorical word in this paradigm would be that there are different nodes. So rather than a hierarchy, they would argue for nodes, or that there are networks, and these are interlinked with human interaction as well. Other non-human agents, an example is pathogens. If we just think about COVID-19, which was a pathogen, and we all lived with that and through that, and there was agency in that pathogen as well. But there are many others. So this is just a teaser. Very often, I think this lies outside of normal discussions. But if you want to talk about more advanced research skills, then post-humanism is definitely a very advanced paradigm to work in, with quite advanced theories. And at different, there's a difference. Data collection is usually the same as what we might use in other paradigms, but how the data is analyzed might look different. All right, so that's just an overview of the most common paradigms. They are by no means the only ones. There are others as well on the continent. But what I try to do is to show you the application of these assumptions. So what the examiner doesn't want to see is that you rewrite a textbook. They know the textbook. What they want to see is, yes, that you do nod to theory, but there is very important is your application of these ontologies and the assumptions to your research. So you might say that in this study, I believe that reality is not solely human-centered and includes non-human entities possessing agency. In my study, the non-human entities relate to, for instance, pathogens. And and then you apply your epistemology and you apply your methodology in terms of the assumption of the paradigm that you hold. So very, very important, and this goes for all your research decisions. The examiner doesn't only want to see you rewriting a textbook, they want to see how you applied this to your research. They want to see how you justify your choice for the decisions that you make in your study. So I hope from this short presentation that it might get your creative juices flowing and might just open up other aspects in terms of paradigms and the outside layer of the onion, and that you might just get a feel for how it might apply and what it means to live these assumptions in your research. So along with our paradigms that we discussed, a very important thing when the slide that I showed you with the philosophical assumptions that influences your choices, your personal paradigm might also influence your choices. So, for instance, if you just took a minute or two and write down just a short sentence or a few words, I believe the world is. So this is an assumption about reality. I believe research is. I believe people are. I believe knowledge is. So you can already see that in your belief statements, we are also then focusing on the assumptions and the dimensions. So just take a minute or so and maybe just jot down what is your personal beliefs in terms of these aspects. And then take a minute or two to consider what the influences of your personal paradigm might have on your choices that you make in your research. So if you, for instance, believe that research no, let's maybe say, I believe that people are necessary to construct knowledge. I don't believe that knowledge can only be generated in a laboratory. That belief will then also guide me to a specific philosophical paradigm where my personal beliefs align with the beliefs of a certain paradigm. So, for instance, I don't like numbers. My eyes roll over when I see a bank statement or anything with numbers on. I simply can't. It's just foreign to me. I don't like it. So I might do quantitative research if it's really, really necessary, but for the most, I'll try to avoid it because it's a personal preference. I like people, I like words, I like talking, I like analyzing words, I like playing around with words. So you can already get a sense that I might be aligning myself more to the qualitative paradigm. So your choices of paradigms is not exclusively focused on your personal beliefs and paradigms, but it may influence your choices in terms of which other paradigms speak to you. So I've been working in the qualitative paradigm for many years, but I'm now starting to move over to post-humanism, critical post-humanism, because my beliefs about research has also changed. And through many years. So if I initially started my research training in the 1980s, for instance, after 50 years, you might think that you might be moving on. And that's where I'm finding myself. I have a few years left before I retire. So my beliefs have also evolved as I've worked within research paradigms. And that might also happen to you, but please don't change it once you've started with your research. Do it then for another project, or if you're a master's and a PhD, or if you're a PhD, then postdocs or something. But so make sure that you can align yourself with the paradigms that are available, and that the rest of your decisions in this onion is then guided by the paradigm that you choose and the assumptions within these paradigms. All right, so enough being said about paradigms. Let's go to something that's a bit more familiar. So your research decisions might also then be influenced by your theoretical frameworks. And so, yeah, I'm speaking about theory as a framework. We might develop a theoretical framework once we've done a literature study, for instance. You might also end with a theoretical framework, but in this instance, I'm referring to theories that you might want to use in your research. So examples of theoretical frameworks could include, for instance, postmodern theories, feminist theories, critical theory, queer theory. Bloom's taxonomy, for instance, could be used as a theory or a guiding framework for your research. So there are many things, many theories, and they are often guided in terms of your field. For instance, in health studies, the health belief model or theory, for instance, is used a lot, but that's quite specific to the health sciences. So you might, in your field, have different theories that are more applicable or more often used in your field. That doesn't mean that you cannot use theories across different paradigms, different fields, different realities. You can move across. And it's actually, once you maybe use a theory or apply a theory to your research, for instance, a PhD, that's not often used. You might find that you have very unique findings because you are applying a theoretical theory or a framework that gives you the opportunity to look at a phenomena through a different lens. So your theory or your theoretical framework that you're working with is like putting on glasses, and say, for instance, they are pink. So throughout your research, you will be looking at all your research decisions, your data collection, your data analysis, your interpretations, your write-up of your finding through these pink glasses. So it isn't something that only lives in the beginning on chapter 2 or 3 of your research, and there it lives and dies, and you don't see it anywhere in your research. Your theoretical frameworks or the theories that you use, you can use more than one. We'll speak about that later on. But it's the glasses that you are going to look at your study with. So if you keep that in mind, I hope this makes a sense for you. So ask yourself, what theoretical frameworks or what theories are you likely to use in your study? So very often, if we're new to research, we don't even know what theories are out there. So read. Maybe if you are new, for instance, on a master's level, just writing a proposal on a master's level, have a look at other studies. What theories did they use? Ask your supervisor, what are the more prevalent theories in your field? Or Google it, or ask ChatGPT. But make an informed decision in terms of through which the lenses are you going to look at your research. So, so we've now identified the external layers of the onion. We've spoken now about philosophical paradigms. We've spoken about personal paradigms. We've spoken about theoretical lenses that we decide on to use to look at our research. And the next slide is just some questions that you might ask yourself that might also now help you to think about the more inner circles of the research onion, and that's your design and methods. So, for instance, you can ask yourself, what type of a study will best answer the research problem or question and the purpose of the study? So what type? Qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods. Like I said, your personal worldview and preferences. How will the design connect to the paradigm being used based on the identification of the philosophical knowledge claims? And we know now there are also other claims. So what is then the best research approach to use, and which methods will fit the knowledge claims in your chosen approach? So when we in the beginning spoke about holding hands, this is typically where the answer to these questions, once you have answered these questions, that you take a step back and then decide whether they hold hands, whether they are logically connected in terms of the paradigm, the theory, the assumptions, your personal preferences, and the choices that you will be making. So it's very, very important that these choices are rigorously thought about, that they are justified, and that they are applied in your research. The following is a case study, but I think I'm just going to go over that for now, and we might use it as a case study to end with, and I might go back to some of these slides when we start looking at different designs and methods. So going back again, the factor influencing our choice of designs or methods, as we said, there are theoretical factors, but then there are also other factors that might influence our choice. And very often practical factors have quite a large influence on the choices that we make. So if you're embarking on a master's study, part-time, you have 3 years to complete your study. If you're on a PhD thesis, 5 years. So you can imagine when working within a 3 years or a 5 years scope, that what you can do in 3 years as opposed to in 5 years might be quite different. So for instance, you can ask yourself, can I pull off a mixed method study in 3 years where I've got 2 full designs or a full write-up? You actually have 2 studies, complete studies, and then they are integrated at some level, and then what follows after that. Do you have the time or the resources or the experience, for instance, to pull this off in a master's study? Mixed methods, I would usually not advise the master students to use. So please factor in time, cost, and funding. Obviously, if you are doing a mixed method study and there's 2 designs on their own, that it's going to be more costly. You would, for instance, need to have a statistician and someone to do co-coding for you. You might need to develop surveys and, for instance, if it's a very large study, train field workers to do interviews with you if the scope is that large. So please think about the practical implications when it comes to your choices of designs and methods. Also, think about ethical factors such as permission and consent, legal issues, and gatekeepers. If you decide, for instance, to do your study in a specific context or in a specific setting, do you have access to the gatekeepers, for instance, in that setting? Would you then, if you don't have, do you want to, can you get to the gatekeepers? Do you need assistance with that? How much time is it going to take? Then also the nature of your topics. Some topics lend themselves to certain designs and methods. So, for instance, very sensitive topics might use more unstructured interview. Deviant subcultures might have observations as a more applicable tool. Nationwide polling might use questionnaires. Historical research might use documents. Cross-national comparisons might use official statistics. So there are many other factors other than just the research and philosophical and theoretical things that you need to think about when you are thinking about your design and methods. So please keep that in mind as well. We're now going to start with just talking a bit about our research designs and methods. And within this, I will then also show you how one can scope to a more advanced level, and what might be better for master studies as opposed to, for instance, PhD choices and advancement. So I always say in a master study, please remember the NQF outcomes for a level 9, NQF level 9, is that you must show that you can follow the research process. That's it. You don't need to you have unique contributions. You don't need to develop something. You don't need to do anything fancy. You only need to show and demonstrate to the examiner that you can follow the research process. So don't try and do more than that. You can use basic methods in a master's study because you have limited time, you might have limited experiences, so don't try to go that fancy or that complicated. As we proceed to PhD studies, certainly we can start to think about more advanced approaches, triangulation, multiple methods, or mixed methods. So again, just the practical constraints. I think we've covered most of this. Just one practical constraint is also important is your supervisor's experience. The choice of design that you are making, have they supervised studies in that? Or is it also a new design to them? And this might happen in a PhD study. So also consider what is your supervisor's expertise and how that might influence your decisions there. So let's have a look at mono, multi, and mixed methods. Now, this slide usually is one that I need to go over more than once, and even if I've gone over it more than once, there will still be questions around it. So I'll try and be as explicit as I possibly can. Now, when we think about mono methods, mono meaning single or one. So at the most basic level, mono method will probably suffice for a master's study. It means that there is a single design, possibly a single data collection technique, with a single type of a data analysis procedure. So a mono method could, for instance, be a quantitative study, or it could be a qualitative study, and you would then work within those singular designs. and aligning your data collection with those specific paradigms and those designs. So usually it's easy to understand the mono method. A multi-method, there's often quite a lot of misunderstanding between a multi-method and a mixed method study. So I will go into it in a bit more depth. But multi, easy to remember as well. Multi is more than one. So a multi-method is more than one data collection technique with the corresponding data analysis procedure. So a multi-method, you might have, for instance, in a survey, you might have open-ended questions, which means that the data is both in numbers and in a textual format. And you would need to then have the corresponding data analysis procedure for each of those. So you are using more than one type of data, and that would be a multi-method. But when we are talking about a mixed method study, it refers to a complete quantitative and a complete qualitative research design combined in a single research, mixing or integrating the findings. Now, this is the key aspect that distinguishes a mixed methods from a multi-method, is the fact that you are working within both a full quantitative design, a full qualitative design, but there is a mixing and an integration that distinguishes it from a multi-method. And we will talk about this mixing and integrating in a minute or two. So those are usually your choices: mono method, multi-method, mixed methods. And I just want to go through a few slides to see how we can apply these methods. So remember, when we spoke about the onion, we had our philosophy, our reasoning, which was inductive or deductive. We might then have our design or methodology that speaks to our data collection and our data analysis. So if we then look at the mono research design, remember we said there is one type of a design chosen. So if we look at positivist and interpretivists, if we follow a positivist paradigm, we use deductive reasoning. We will usually use questionnaires or surveys. It will be quantitative in nature. We are working with numbers as data. So the statistical is usually a statistical analysis that falls within this mono method. For instance, the quantitative designs. If we are looking at a mono design in terms of interpretivist paradigm, we will have our reasoning as more inductive. We often use interviews, observation, field notes, for instance, as our data collection methods. So in qualitative research, we work with text, sometimes pictures, but even the pictures end up as text. And we usually have some form of a thematic analysis or content analysis or discourse analysis. So those are your mono methods. It is still a mono method if, for instance, maybe just keep it as that. So within a mono method, you have one type of data collection and then all the aligning aspects that goes with that, such as your analysis. If we look now, for instance, at a qualitative multi-method design, The philosophy would still be interpretivist, and the reasoning inductive. How data collection, however, the multi-methods can now be seen because we are using more than one type of data collection. For instance, interviews, focus groups, photos, pictures, those are all typically qualitative types of data, but you can see that there is more than one data collection technique. In this instance, our data is qualitative text and pictures, but as I said, even the pictures ends up as text, and we usually then have a thematic analysis. So you can see within the multi-method, it is around different, that you have more than one data collection method in this choice. We will talk about the quantitative aspects now, but I just want to go through the complexity of qualitative designs and how we can also then have levels of complexity that can make our design choices more advanced or basic. So at the very basic level of qualitative designs, we find our generic approaches, such as it is a qualitative design, which is exploratory, descriptive, and contextual in nature. That's usually the most basic qualitative design, to explore and describe within a certain context. And that is quite okay in a master's study. However, when we look at a PhD study, for instance, in using a qualitative design, we would expect of a student to use maybe one of Cresswell's approaches. So the narrative approach, for instance, is within the different approaches, the most basic. A case study is a bit more advanced, ethnography a bit more advanced, phenomenology is getting quite advanced, and grounded theory is the most advanced of the qualitative approaches. So you can see that I know in psychology, they often use the narrative approach and often use phenomenology, even in a master's study, but please be careful of phenomenology. Phenomenology has its own paradigm, it has its own rhetoric, it has its own methodology, it has their own data analysis techniques. So I do know that often in psychology you do use phenomenology on a master's level, but please be careful because there are very specific design issues and choices within phenomenology. Those are the qualitative designs in terms of their levels of complexity. Now, in the quantitative designs, at the very basic, we might find a descriptive study which only examines the characteristics of a particular situation or group. And then a more advanced level might be correlation studies, where we examine the relationship between two or more variables. Experiment, where we look at cause and effect, is more advanced than a descriptive study. And then a quasi-experimental also examines cause used when not all variables can be controlled. And that's probably one of the most advanced designs in quantitative research. So you can see that we can also build complexity within a specific design. So let's see how we can build complexity in our data analysis. For instance, in qualitative data analysis, content analysis, where we count words, more aligned, a bit more on the continuum, leaning towards positivism, where we count, but can still, at a very basic level, be used in qualitative data analysis. Thematic analysis is a bit more advanced, narrative analysis more advanced, phenomenological analysis quite advanced, and grounded theory very advanced data analysis techniques. In terms of building complexity in quantitative analysis, basic statistical analysis and techniques for descriptive studies. Then more advanced would be a multivariate analysis of variance, factors and corresponding analysis, structural equation modeling, more advanced logit and pro-bit models. I have no idea what this refers to. And then, for instance, multilinear regression and other methods at the top. So you can build advancement and complexities within a certain design, even if it is a mono design. So for instance, I could, on a PhD level, have a mono design, qualitative study with a grounded theory approach. That would suffice for a PhD study, for instance, because of such an advanced level of the approach, and the data analysis, and then developing theory based on that. So that would suffice for instance, a mono design and method within a PhD that is quite advanced. So let's now talk about mixed methods. So this is a design that takes place where the mixing and the integration takes place at some or several points in the design. So remember, I said that the hallmark of a mixed method design is that there is integration at one or several points in the design. So there is somewhere where the qualitative and the quantitative aspects meet in the study, and there is an integration taking place. If there is no integration taking place or convergences happening within the design, then we can't say that it is a mixed method design. So very, very important that there is that integration, and there can be different points where that can happen, and we might talk about it just a few slides on. So mixed method design, philosophical assumptions, realist or pragmatist, reasoning, deductive, inductive, abduction, or a mix. Could be interviews and questionnaires, for example. Both qualitative and quantitative data is used. Data analysis is both, for instance, thematical and statistical. So for a mixed method design, as I said, there is a merge of the data at one or different points. For example, we might have different weights. We can decide that in our mixed method design, the quantitative aspect has more weight than the qualitative aspect. So we would often then say qual in capital letters, quan lowercase, indicating that the weight is more on the quantitative aspect. Can be anything. It can be equal weights, quan qual. It can be in different sequences. The one can follow the other. So it's sequential, or it might be at the same time that you collect data at the same time, and then integrate these findings or the data at some point. When we look at, for instance, I just want to go to the next slide. So the mixes can take place in terms of the timing. Which one goes first, last, or are they the same? The mix could be in the weight. We've spoken about that, quan qual. It can be in terms of the sequences. And then very important, there is that conversion at some point with the data. So this is just an example of what I explained. You could have a qual-quan, where when we write it like this, the qualitative aspect has more weight than the quan, and that there indicates a sequencing. These are the other options. There's many. It depends on what you decide is the weighting. Now, you can, for instance, if the weight is heavier to the qual side, it would be an explanatory. If it's more on the qual side, it's exploratory approach. If it's more on the quant side, it is an explanatory approach. So you could say, for instance, a qual-quan, where the qual is heavier, exploratory sequential mixed method design. That would indicate the weights, the sequence, the timing, and then you would need to explain then where the convergence takes place. So just as an exercise, and you can put your answers in the Q&A, and we can chat from there. So if your study collects qualitative data to inform or enhance your survey, the data is used to meet the aim of the study, which is to develop guidelines for managers to enhance their leadership skill. What type of a study is this? So just ponder on this for a moment. It collects qualitative data. So just think about the sequencing here. Qualitative data is first used, and then after that, that is used to inform or enhance the quantitative data collection. So you can now already see what is the sequence. The one comes before the other. And this data then is integrated for developing guidelines, for instance. So both the data, so there's a convergence in terms of the data collection. The one informs the other, and then there's another convergence when both these data collection methods are then used and the outcome used to develop guidelines. So there's a convergence or integration at different points. So what type of a study do you think this is? If you want to, just pop your answers in the Q&A, and we can then also have a look if you were able to spot what type of a mixed method design this is. So when we look at our assumptions, then you in your decision, you might then decide what's the main elements of your research process. By nature, is it quantitative or qualitative? The data collection tools or types of data, analytic techniques are not necessarily paradigmatic. So in terms of the assumptions might influence your decisions. But remember, we said a mixed method design works within the philosophical paradigm of pragmatism. So we want to use methods that has the best practical outcome for our study. So here is just maybe a pictorial demonstration of how the mixing of data looks in a mixed method design. So you might decide that you are going to combine your findings during your data analysis. So you might then merge and integrate the data. when you interpret and present the data. Or you can embed the data, the qual within the quan or the quan within the qual, or you can connect the data, qual leads to quan or quan leads to qual. Therefore, your focus is either on the quan or the qual. And you can now see there's different places where you can integrate your findings in this process. Okay. So let's look just before we now go over to other methods. Is this might also then help you if we look at the evaluation criteria for a mixed method. So what I would suggest you do is find a mixed method study and evaluate the study according to this criteria. So was the study feasible given the amount of data to be collected and concomitant issues of resources, time, and expertise? You might also want to evaluate, for instance, a master's or a doctoral thesis could use the same. Does the study include both quantitative and qualitative research questions? Remember, these are two full designs. So each design will merely be a study on its own. So it will have their own objectives. Each design will have its own questions. It will have its own population sampling, data collection, data analysis, and measures of rigor, for instance, in each one of these. So it's kind of writing up two studies. And then the study needs to clearly identify the quant and the qual data collection techniques. And does the study use appropriate data analysis techniques? So it's that holding hands and logic. Then very important, does mixing or integrating the data take place? If there is no mixing, integrated, or convergence, then it might not qualify as a mixed method design or mixed method study. So this is very, very important criteria, is that when you do evaluate a mixed method design, that you look at where the integration or convergence or the mixing took place. Okay, so a very important aspect once you've decided on a design or approach and the level of complexity, you need to state your chosen design methods, methodology. You need to critically motivate each choice. So I often say, with reference to credible sources, that's not older than 2 or 3 years. You discuss the advantages and the disadvantage of your chosen design or method. You discuss how you will manage the disadvantages, what are the ethical implications of your choices, and is there any aspect that is unique to your design or your method or your content. And remember this unique aspect, the PhD students can use this, for instance, as a standalone article. So if you are using, for instance, in terms of complexity, for instance, you can use 2 theoretical frameworks, which is maybe unique. And that leads to a more unique methodology, for instance, with unique findings based on that. This could be an article, for instance. Just a reminder, when I speak about articles, remember that a master student, before they can graduate, must have submitted 1 article to a journal, and a PhD student too. That needs to be completed and submitted before you can graduate. So please think about and start working on articles and conceptualize these early in your study. I know it's very freaky if you're just writing your proposal now to think about articles, but don't wait until you finish to start thinking about articles. Okay, so what I'm trying to say to you is that any and every choice in terms of your research design and methods or your research methodology, you need to apply the theory to your study and content. You need to justify your choice. You need to say what's the advantages and disadvantages. And you need to give a rationale for why you're choosing what you are um, decided that you would choose. So that it's the whole aim is that your examiner can see that you made informed decisions about your design and your methods. Okay, one more exercise. So that's what I said just now as well. That you, if you want to, select a mixed method study in your field and using the evaluation criteria that we discussed, and then evaluate whether it addresses the components of a mixed method design. All right, just a mono or mixed methods then. Okay, so I want to stop with the presentations here because I think by this time you might have had quite an overload of information, and we're about halfway through the slides, so we can then start discussing those in the other section. So I'm going to stop share. Well, I don't need to stop sharing. We can keep that up. But I would like to go over to the question and answer section so that we can just maybe now have a more a discussion in terms of what is your questions up to here, what is clear, unclear, moments of truth that you had, maybe answers related to the exercises that we have. So I'd like to have a more interactive session for the rest of the time that we are together, and then we will go over to more theory based on maybe also what your needs are for Thursday. So please, I'm looking for your questions, answers in terms of reflections on the content that we had. Any questions of areas that's maybe still vague or not explicit. I'm just looking on my side. I don't see any published questions yet on my side. So if you can start in the Q&A published section, then we can start with a more interactive part of our presentation for tonight. Okay, so please, questions. There seems to be two, but I can't read them. I can just see little blocks. Dineo, if there is others that I might not see, maybe just let me know. But for now, I don't see any questions. And with such heavy topics, I can't imagine that there's no questions. Questions, comments, moments of truth, what you would like to work on Thursday evening. I'm just going to go to the Q&As. Let's just see, no new questions. Now, from your side, I don't know if I'm maybe not seeing anything on my side. It's very strange that there's nothing coming up. I also see no attendees, which is quite strange.
It looks like we don't have questions, Prof.
Okay, all right.
So what I would suggest, if there's any questions that might be posted anytime from now, we can try to address them in the next session.
Okay, all right. Okay. All right. So please, if there are any questions or reflections, please still post them in the Q&A. And we can then pick them up in Thursday's session. Also, I would appreciate if you have any suggestions for or any needs that you'd like me to cover on Thursday in terms of more advanced designs or techniques, methods. I'll then on Thursday also carry on with some of the more advanced combinations. But then please, I'm going to stop waffling now, and I'd like to then see the questions and that you might want to pose or comments that you have. Otherwise, from me, then it's an early good night if there isn't any other burning questions that you might have.